do I put every class into my dependency injection system? And the answer is no. No, you don't. So the next question would be, okay, so which classes don't I put into dependency injection? And I do want to point out, first of all, that we do have classes here. So our index actually has a class behind it. And that is automatically put in a dependency injection for us. That's part of our, if we go here and look at the add Razor pages and add server-side Blazor, those are put in automatically. So they are in there, but we're not manually adding them. But there are other classes that we do not put into dependency injection. And those most typically are models. So let's create a folder here called models. And this would be display models, data that you would put on a page. I'm just going to create a sample model. Let's call it the person model. And in here, we're going to put some data. First name and last name. Now, this is a model. It can also be a DTO. It can also have other names. But basically what this is a class that just holds data, okay? Now, most typically, we would get data from somewhere. So maybe we call an API and get data. Or maybe we call into our database system and get data back. And we get data in this form where it's a class that holds data. Okay, and this would represent one row in a database or one row from an API. Now, obviously, it's very simple, just first and last name, but that's okay. So we don't put this into dependency injection system. Why? Why wouldn't we put this into the dependency injection system? In fact, if we want to use this model, let's just say that on our index page, we wanted to put maybe want to put an edit form. We're going to create a new person. Well, we'd come down here and say, put our code section in here. This is where the class is for index.razor. We could have it in an actual separate file. That's a whole nother thing that I cover in Blazor server in depth, among other places. But the general gist is we can put our code here or in a separate class file. Putting it here is just simpler to start off with, and they can move it later. So in here, we could put person model, and that's going to create the full path, which we'll leave like that for now. And P equals new person model. And you may say, oh, Tim, we got a problem here because this right here, that's what dependency injection hates. And that's the whole reason we have dependency injection is to stop this new, to stop the instantiation of classes. Yes and no. Yes, we don't want to have instantiation of classes we depend on. But that's where we have a little bit of a difference here. We're not creating a dependency on person model, not the same way. Yes, we depend on that class existing. And yes, if you change this class, it's going to change how this potentially works. But that's about it. Let's think of this another way. What if in our process demo, we decided that we wanted to work on, maybe even in this get days a month, we want to work on a person. So we come in here and say person model, P equals new person model. And P dot first name equals Tim, etc. Right? How does that significantly change our class? It doesn't. In fact, we have a unit test that runs against this get days and month. Having this in here has no bearing. It doesn't change anything. Even if this were to hold the data and or send it back, it's still not going to make a change. If we decide we want to unit test this method, which we did, and we said, oh, but we need to get rid of all dependencies, which we do with iDemo, but how do you get rid of this dependency? Well, there is no dependency. It's just a model. And you say, well, yes, but we need to get rid of it. Why? It's not doing anything. And that's what a dependency really is. A class that does something. So this doesn't do anything. If you create an interface for this, because we put interfaces for everything in dependency injection, what's the point? Why would you have an interface for a model? Because what does an interface do? So if we just do control dot and say extract interface, we'll do it right in the current file, which normally I wouldn't do, but we're going to. Okay, so you want to create a new class instance to mock out what this does? Okay, I guess we could do that. Public class mock person model, and it implements iPerson model. This is for our testing purposes. So let's implement this interface. Well, that's the same thing as what we have up there. There's no differences because there's no logic here. Now, maybe if you put a little logic in a getter or a setter, maybe you'd want to have some kind of replacement for it. But the reality is that's not what we have with typical models. Typical models just hold data. So therefore, there's no point in creating a mock of it. There's no point in trying to pull it out for testing purposes. So if there's no point to pulling it out for testing purposes, that eliminates one of the benefits of dependency injection, which doesn't really apply to a person model or a model in general. Well, another benefit of dependency injection is that we could come down here to, let's grab the demo DI setup again. We could replace this iDemo implementation. Instead of demo, we can make it UTC demo. Well, what if we did that with a model? Well, with our model, we have person model. If we replace that with a different one, what's it going to look like? It's going to look like that, which is the same. So that's another benefit of dependency injection that no longer applies to this type of class. So really, there is no benefit to applying dependency injection to our models. Models just hold data. Now, again, if you start putting logic in your models, then absolutely, you need to think about what to do there. But then your model also isn't really conforming to solid, which is a single responsibility principle, that first S, well, the only S in solid, but that first letter, that's not doing that because now your model is doing two things. It's holding data and it's also working on that data. So then you've got a dual purpose model there. There are some arguments for that. For example, in a user interface, typically our models will have some decorators on them. So you have things like a decorator up here that says, okay, this property, the common name or the display name will be first space name. Okay, so you decorate with that, obviously not with a comment, but with an actual decorator. Maybe it's required, or maybe the maximum length is 10, those kind of things. Those are decorators that be applied to a model in a front end. But in general, you don't mix your methods, which are taking actions and doing work. You don't mix those with your data carriers, your models, or DTOs. So in that case, I would just separate the two into having one do the work and one be the data carrier. And then you don't have to worry about your models being in dependency injection. This also makes it much, much easier for tools like Entity Framework or Dapper or other ORMs, because the fact that an ORM is an object relational mapper. What it's doing is it's going to create models, a list of models based upon the data from a database. Well, it's very hard for those to pull it from dependency injection, and it adds overhead, neither of which is really what you want to have in your code. So you make that as easy as possible by allowing, again, any framework, Dapper, or whoever, to just create that list of model, that IEnumerable of model, based upon the data. And that tool is what says, okay, equals new class, and generates as many as is necessary. So that's another reason why we just don't put it in dependency injection. All right. So there are classes you don't put in dependency injection. Primarily, they are data models, classes that just hold data.